Well, hello, hello. Welcome to this episode of Grow or Die. I am Laura Testikoff from Firebird Summit.
What is going on, everybody? I'm Lawrence Henderson from Boss LLC. Laura, it's always a pleasure getting to spend a little bit of time with you.
And you too as well, my friend. So tell me, what is today's topic?
Today's topic is all about navigating conflict in all of its glory.
Glory. That makes it sound like so much like sexy, glamorous fun.
But if you heard the words,
yes.
right? And the funny part about it is that's part of what we do with conflict is somehow, some way, and particularly us coaches, right? That we are the masters of a reframe. And even though like life sucks, like just does. But there's something about it that, okay, so what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of where I land with it. And again, like similar to you, and as we were just talking about just all the things that are happening in the world, and to, not only to within our own lives, but to people we care about. And in particular, again, navigating change and transition and all the rest of those things, as me and my family have over the past several months. But when you hear the words just navigating conflict, where's that land with you, Alora?
So I think what immediately comes up for me is that some, different flavors have different degrees of agony that go with them, right? Like there are some places in my life where it doesn't even date me. Like it's funny. I spent most of my career in a job where part of my job was always to give bad news to people, right? Bad news to clients, bad news to employees, bad news to my boss. So like I am really good in that capacity as being the bearer of bad news, getting yelled at for being the messenger of bad news, and then having to go back and figure out how do we mitigate whatever this thing is as well as possible. And so like in that area of my life, it really doesn't normally faze me. So I actually find myself sometimes surprised when I'm talking to someone else. I'm like, well, I have to tell a client, client really thinks we can do this, but can't, we're gonna have to do this instead. And like because I think I got sort of inured to that version of a conversation really early in my career, I always find it like, oh, really? You're worried about that? And so I find myself surprised there. Whereas on the other side, like, if I'm having a disagreement with my husband and we're just in absolute, like that is a totally different, it brings up so much other stuff. So I think for me, what I've gotten clearer and clearer about is that there are places, I kind of think of it like concentric circles, right? Like there are some circles in my life as you move out from the center where it's not a big deal. And sometimes like the really far outer circles, it's not a big deal because like you're just not that invested, right? I mean, telling somebody bad news if you have no real investment, nah. If you're kind of that next layer in, maybe you do have some degree of investment, but you're not taking stuff personally. So that part becomes a little bit easier. But as you kind of move closer and closer to the core of your life, I think, for me, that's where conflict gets a lot tougher as you get closer.
Yeah, and it's funny, as you were going in, and I'm super familiar with kind of that circle, right? Those kind of circles of influence and control and all those other things. And I think for me, one of the biggest reasons that, I still find it hard with the circles, right? And the layers of conflict is not there being an immediate ability to pinpoint where it's coming from, right? And I'm such a I need to know, right? I'm a reverse engineer, I'll dig into it so I can fix it, so I can like make it go away. And when it's not readily available, like I can stall myself out a bit. And it actually happened to me kind of earlier in this week. I was like, I just feel like I'm in a funk, and it's like been riding me for the last couple of weeks where I would get up for meetings and I would, kind of go there, and, some people are like, oh man, you kind of probably depressed. And I was like, nah, I wasn't feeling it. There was some type of internal conflict with why I couldn't move forward with things in my life. And I finally was like, all right, I give up. And the moment I threw my hands up to whatever it was when it was like, okay, now you're ready to actually deal with the conflict that you were actually experiencing. And it was a closer to the center core type of issue that I literally was like, I would approach it, turn left. I would approach it, turn right. Like I like every time I got close to it, like I would bail out. And so finally I was surrendered to it. And that's when I got what I needed to get as it pertains to conflict.
So it's so funny. I don't think of you as a procrastinator ever, but it sounds like that's the tactic you defaulted to when you were not certain how to explain what was happening.
That is exactly what happened. And the crazy part about it is it's like I frustrated myself, but it was almost like watching a movie you've seen before. And it's like, but you know the outcome. If this happens, if you do this, but it's like I couldn't do anything about it. And that in and of itself was causing me conflict. And I was just like, ah.
So that's actually, so in that case, it was just you kind of like just trying to shrug it off and just lean into it and stop trying to fight it, stop trying to figure it out, stop trying to dig under it, just like suck it up. This is what it is. And that made the difference.
100%. 100%. And I'll tell our audience, I cried a solitary thug tear because I released some tension in my life that I was having some internal stuff happening. And it just was like, but it was like, it was almost like that was a pressure release. Mm-hmm. And it freed up everything else. Right. And inside of it, and I think a lot of people, what happens, Laura, and probably you and the things that are going on in your life with some of your peers and your friends, is just like when you're locked up in those things, you don't even realize what you have lost access to when you're locked in that type of conflict.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that too, because so it's funny because for me, as I think about what you just said, right, which is that for you, where conflict becomes harder to either push through or anything, is because you're trying to figure out what the cause is, right? And for you, figuring out the cause is how you are most confident going in and dealing with it. It's funny because for me, I don't think it's as much about the cause as I think when I start trying to avoid conflict, like the avoiding thing is like, that's the hardest one because you can't get anything resolved if you're avoiding stuff, right? But I think for me, the hardest thing to avoid is I hate emotional reactions. I hate my own emotional reactions. I hate other people's emotions. I hate emotional reactions. And so I always know that, first of all, if I can recognize that I am having an emotional reaction, I'll usually throw a flag on the play and be like, I need a timeout because I am being emotional right now. I don't like that. I'm not okay with that. I try to avoid making decisions or certainly having a difficult conversation in that state, because that's when like stuff gets away from me that I regret later. So I try to be really careful there. But sometimes it's not me, right? Sometimes it's someone else's emotional reaction that either I'm watching happen and I'm trying to figure out how to de-escalate it, or I am afraid they're going to do it. And I think that's actually, again, it comes back to that anticipation piece, right? Because if you're worried that they're gonna have one, you're also sort of not being fair to them because you're anticipating their behavior before they've actually demonstrated it. And then you just sort of preemptively shut yourself up. And so for me, that I think is really where I get caught the most, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to walk on eggshells because I know, like I know my grandmother's in a bad mood, or like whatever. Like I know something is in sort of this like touchy, hypersensitive state, and because I so hate reactions from anybody, if I feel like I'm maybe a little too close to potentially stepping on an emotional landmine, I'll just back the hell off and go, yeah, I'm not gonna say nothing.
It's hilarious because I think you just spoke to, it's like I'm fine with blood. I'm not fine with my blood. Like I'm the biggest baby. Like if I cut myself, it's the most dramatic experience. But it's like, but this is a combat veteran putting tourniquets on people. Like I could do that all day long, but when it's mine, but in conflict, it's like having to navigate. And I love what you said, because there's such an awareness around, okay, what are my things, right? Particularly in things like conflict. And what ends up happening is, and I love that you brought up the word behavior, because, doing a training earlier this week with some leaders, and we're talking about, okay, how do you build team success? And team success is not void of conflict. It's actually having the ability to engage it and be constructive in it. But if you're bad as an individual at it, what makes you think you're going to be a high performing team building success if you compound that with every individual not actually really being good at conflict? And so as I said that out loud, it was like, it caused a laugh, but it was such an awareness that got laid in the room.
Well, so I love that you said that, because it's funny, because I've recently started working for a new company, and as I'm kind of getting my arms around the role and the team and the people, I'm watching some of the communication style. And again, it's a totally global team. It's completely virtual. So we don't necessarily have some of the normal face-to-face social cues. Also, I'm discovering that more people than I'm used to don't turn their video camera on, which really makes kind of trying to read some of the cues a little harder. And so it's been really interesting, because I try, one of the things I learned a long time ago is just wait, right? Just wait. You don't if something comes to mind, that's great. You could be right, you could be wrong, but just count to 10, see what other people are saying, and don't jump in. Because especially, we've talked about this before. I tend to have a bad habit of sort of sucking oxygen out of the room once I start talking. And I don't want to do that. I'm dealing with a bunch of smart people who've been doing, this in this context for a lot longer than I have. And so when I see something that kind of strikes me as, I'm not sure I get that. I kind of try to count to 10 a couple times and say, okay, give me a little bit of time to see if it makes sense. I'm just not seeing the whole picture right now. But then when I get to a point where I'm like, oh no, actually, I see what's wrong, and now it's time to fix it. But again, I'm in a new context with new people. And if there's one thing I really catch myself self-censoring around, is anything that I think might cause an emotional reaction. And then I'm thinking to myself, but you got a job to do, dummy. Get it done. You're not gonna not have this conflict arise. It doesn't have to be negative, and it doesn't have to be a bad experience for anyone. And people might have an emotional reaction, but for me, that's the part I have to remind myself of, is that just because they have there's a certain inclination I have to sort of let myself be held hostage to the potential of them having an emotional reaction, just because my aversion to it is so severe. And I have to talk myself through that. I have to come back to, look, just walk it off. Seriously, people have emotional reactions. You can't control that. So calm down about it. But it's sometimes that, to your point, right? You have to just talk yourself back through it.
And I like what you said there, particularly. So I don't know if you remember in coach training or where I picked this up at, but WAIT as an acronym to engagement. And so why am I talking? And really so you are mindful and conscious and intentional with the words you use next. And I love that you said, okay, am I going to ask this question for clarity, or out of my wanting them, me leading them towards someplace, right?
Oh, that's the nasty passive aggressive reason to ask.
Right.
Yes.
And so that, and really what I began, and I 10X'd weight to, okay, that also should make you check in on motive and intent of why you're talking, right? So you become known as that person, not just somebody who wants to pontificate, but there's a level of intention and consciousness. And it was said, I was with a group of leaders, and they described with their leader that I was doing executive coaching for, and nobody knew in the space I was coaching him. And he said out loud, he was like, when they get things from me now, they know it's important to read. And because before he was like that serial email blaster.
Oh, just the spammer and everybody started tuning him out.
And that's exactly what happened. And he would come to meetings and he would get so frustrated because he was like, hey, so this meeting is about the email I sent earlier and this, that, and other. And for the first couple times, and it wasn't until coaching, and I said, okay, so what did they say? And he was like, they frustrate me so much. And I was like, well, what do they say about, when they're not coming prepared? I said, nobody wakes up and they say, self, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to tick my boss off by not being prepared for our meetings. Like nobody's having that conversation.
No, nobody ever anywhere says that.
Ever. But that was his mindset. Like he had gotten that point. And I was like, okay, play back for me. What were some of the things that they shared with you about why they didn't come prepared? He said, well, one had a smart aleck comment when I asked, well, did you read my email? And he said, somebody responded, which one?
Oh, that one just said it all, didn't it?
And I did exactly what you did, but I could see it was rising up in him as he said it back, because he thought this person was being so disrespectful and insubordinate. And I busted out laughing. I said, oh, you're that guy. And he was like, huh? I was like, oh, you're the serial emailer. And I wish I would have had the word spammer. That would have been such a better word. And he was like, oh my God, I'm that guy. And it was like, and you should have saw the tension and the melt away. And it was about to go into sympathy and just cringeworthiness. And I was like, stop.
Yep.
I was like, you found it.
Yeah. So now you can do something about it.
Right. And so he was like, okay. Right. And so when you think about those moments in your life dealing with conflict, like, how have you caught yourself not wanting to lean into your emotional context that others may need from you?
Well, so, I think what I've normally, it's been one of two ways, right? Either scenario one is because for some other reason, I underestimated an emotional reaction from someone. Either I was too distracted with something else that I didn't really think much of it, or I thought it was kind of such a non-issue that it never really occurred to me anybody was going to get their knickers in a twist about it. And then I find myself in the situation and someone's having an emotional reaction and I'm like, no, bloody hell did that come from? What the hell? What? Seriously? So there's that version. The other one is, okay, this could truly legitimately suck. I'm gonna just put on my tackle gear and I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna be prepared for it. And I think the reality of either one of those scenarios is that it's never really as bad as you make it out to be in your head. And I think that to me becomes the most important part. I think in the first scenario, I might have, I'm more inclined to catch myself a little bit flat-footed, maybe not handle kind of the surprise. The surprise might throw me off more, especially if I really don't think the reaction is worth. If I'm like, wow, that was a mountain out of a molehill. What the hell just happened? Then sometimes I can get caught a little bit in my own brain about whoa, why is this such a big thing? But I think for the other ones, especially when I'm like, okay, man, this is going to be a crappy conversation. I know I don't want to do it, but suck it up, buttercup, because that's what you got to do now. Anticipation is always, I think, our worst enemy above all else. The more you sit in your own head, just stewing on the coulda, woulda, shoulda crap that might come at you, you turn it into this big, massive thing, and then you finally do it. You're like, God, I spent a week giving myself an ulcer about what turned out to be a 15-minute non-issue conversation. Really? Man, seriously,
Yeah.
If it burned calories, it might be worth it, but it just doesn't give me any sleep. That's not helpful. Seriously, if we could burn calories doing that, then I wouldn't have any problem with it at all, man.
Man, awesome. This brings up for me, and again, I don't know. I'm telling you, she needs to cut us a sponsor check. How much her name comes up. Reminds me of a Dare to Lead podcast episode I was listening to, and they were talking about when to give someone feedback after some conflict has occurred. Mm-hmm. And again, it's really that giving yourself space, giving it some distance, but Brene called it like her 24-minute rule, where she gives herself 24 minutes or 24 hours. It doesn't go outside of that range. Based on the extent of the conflict. And again, thinking about self and thinking about others, because again, we understand that feedback in and of itself needs to be timely, needs to be accurate, needs to be filled with facts, and not your
and actionable. It can't just be, hey, you suck.
Whether and as a result of your suckage, this is what was impacted. And I think people need that to to move forward, right? And in the timely part is key, because when I think back just to what happened with me, right? The procrastination and the things I didn't want to deal with, the second, third, and fourth order effects of not dealing with it. And I have access to the resources that could have helped me process it. I have you as a peer coach. I have several friends of mine that are certified licensed therapists that, based on what I was going through, they was like, dude, if you need anything, wave the white flag. But like you, I don't like my own blood.
Nope. I know. Yeah. Physician heal thyself, huh? We're good at that stuff.
Man, listen.
Seriously. No, and I think that's actually, I think that's actually a really good point about this too, right? I think a lot of times we think that, I'll push it off to tomorrow, But like the truth is, there is a whole set of ripple effects that come with it. And it's not just because you're not getting someone proper feedback in time. It's not because something else is being stalled. It's not just because it might be, might be up all night, like angsting about this, potential conversation, but like there are other side effects. Like it doesn't help anybody to just keep kicking the can down the road just because you're feeling stressed about it. I like the 24 minutes to 24 hours kind of rule, because I think the biggest mistake I have probably made, again, when I haven't caught myself having my own emotional reaction, when I think I like the 24-minute piece, right? Because as long as you don't like try to jump the gun like immediately, you have a much better chance of like, all right, hold on, am I like speaking, what's my intent in speaking right now? Like, am I just like pissed and just emotionally fire hosing someone, or is there actually a reason for me to come back and have this conversation? And I think sometimes you need to give yourself a window to kind of, go off, count to 10 a little bit, and clear your head before you open your mouth.
And I think it leads me to, kind of, and it's funny because, this semester of all semesters, to have the conflict management and conflict resolution course in my PhD program, and learning about all these different models around, and there was one in particular, this model, and I can't get it out of my head, that was called the triangle of satisfaction. And in this triangle of satisfaction, there was really the three sides are, the one side is results, right? Which most organizations, everybody's trying to move towards results. But then the one other side was about process, procedure, and all the rest of these things that, again, if they're in line, they feel the results. But the bottom of it, and I don't know if it was intentional or this is just the way I processed it, the bottom was psychological / emotion as a part of this triangle of satisfaction. And as I was looking, I was doing an assignment, and I'm like, the bottom fell out.
And nice of them to arrange your metaphor for you so perfectly, wasn't it?
It was perfect.
Okay, so then how do you work with someone who does hit that point? Like, I mean, so yeah, bottom falls out. You're not dealing with it. You're not, addressing it. You're maybe kind of just wallowing in it. So how do you work with the client who's in that point?
I think, again, it goes back to not only creating awareness, but moving them to management, right, of what's actually happening. But we need to get to a place where they even fail forward in trying to frame what it actually even is. And I think for me, that was the biggest hurdle, because I knew what results I wanted, but procedurally it made sense, but it was clunky because I was out of whack emotionally, the other two didn't make sense. So for me, that one was so strong. And I think the awareness of where, if we're using the triangle in the metaphor, which piece is out of whack. And more times than not, some people have two of the three. And you're trying to fight an uphill battle. If two of the three sides, like, you just got a line. You don't even got like half triangle. You just got a line.
Well, and part of what I like about the triangle metaphor is, the math of a triangle means if one of those has grown disproportionately, it does throw the balance off from the others. And I think that to me is always a really helpful way to come back to the notion of like, how are you balancing these conflicting needs or demands on you, or things that are kind of, surfacing as you're working through stuff. And to be able to come back and say, okay, look, I've got the emotional component is like so overwhelming to me right now. It's throwing off my ability to deal with, any of the process, and it's definitely not helping me get results. So in that model, if I'm completely having to double down on dealing with the emotional stuff, it's like, okay, then what is the process that I need to go through to actually make that work so that I can get back to results? And I was working with someone today, and we ended up kind of creating a Venn diagram, because I always like that relational question, right? Because everything exists as itself, but then it also all exists in relation to something else. And the ones that matter are where you usually find the biggest conflict, right? So if your emotions are completely out of your sense of comfort and control and management, then no, results are probably going to feel pretty far out of reach at the moment. So how do you then you have to come back to, okay, so again, I like that model too, right? If you know that the emotional component has just like swarmed out of control and it's making the results impossible, then what is your process? How do you define your process for getting that brought back down to something that you can manage and bring everything back into a balance that works?
Yeah, I think it really starts with, again, the truth about what's represented in each of those areas, right? And I think for so long, because I fancy myself a good operations guy, that I leaned on my ability to, like you said, suck it up, buttercup, put some dirt on it, get back in the fight. Like I was trying it all on myself, which for me, I was in process and procedure too much. So it was getting bigger, but I was losing track, and results were getting further and further away from me. And so for us, it can happen in us defining and redefining what's in each of those areas. And then, okay, really getting honest about what's true. And I think once I got honest, that was the release for me. What was actually true? I still hurting.
Yeah.
Still frustrated. I was still like, and once I said, boom, hands up, psychological was the actual area I should have been in the whole time, because I was off. And it was like, and I felt that I was off, but I was like, I went back to procedure. What's my thing? Lock back in. And I had basically overextended myself in one of the areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I love this.
Well, I'm glad that you, so I always find it funny when doing exactly the opposite of what you always think you're supposed to do is actually what works.
Isn't that the kind of conundrum in all of it? It's like,
yeah.
like, wow.
Yeah, every single time. Well, and it's funny because, I think that shows up a lot too. Like I said, I don't like emotional reactions, but then I find that people are kind of so used to me not having an emotional reaction that when I just kind of like stop and have an emotional reaction, like it sort of brings everything to a halt. And all of a sudden, like, we can have a real conversation. And it's not what I would ever think of doing. Like that only ever happens when I just hit a point where I just can't not do it. But yeah, it's not it, but it's always interesting to me how, like, that 180 sometimes just is the thing that dislodges everything.
And I think in all that's happening in the world, individually, I mean, through in globally, tapping into kind of what our thing is, or our things, but still understanding we have community that we should be tapping into to support us in this. And again, here comes this vulnerability thing. and getting back to the place where we're really leaning in and making vulnerability operational in our lives. Because again, there's something to, and again, it could be situational, but not being afraid to go there. Because who knows what it will support you being able to do. And again, I want to be happy. I want to be satisfied. And I was off. And so if you think about just how you want to navigate through life, navigate to and grow to things, really having that ability to check in and have others in your life that you give permission to check in has really been immensely crucial in this time for me. And that was the other part of it too. I was saying I was giving people permission, but every time somebody asks, I put some dirt on it face and I'm good. And I got called out. And the day that kind of everything kind of unraveled for me, one of my other coach buddies, he kind of called me out and was like, I hear it.
Yep. So actually that was going to be part of my next question is what signs do you notice in yourself? So having someone else help is always an advantage when you've got that. But for yourself, like when you notice that you're not being open to being vulnerable in a case like that, what are the symptoms or the signs that you see in yourself that you try to be more aware of?
I'm normally really, really quick on my feet. And during that period, I was very cloudy about like not one or two things, everything. And it was happening in a coaching session where I literally had more notes, and the notes they were to me, hey, stay present. Hey, stay present. Hey, stay present. Like literally within 10 minutes, I was
rewriting it. Yeah,
I had to keep writing it because I kept going away. And I'm never like that, particularly with coaching clients. And I kept, hey, stay present.
Yeah.
Hey, stay present. And that's how that's the biggest one for me. What about you?
That one definitely is a problem, but it's I think for me it's more actually realizing that again I'm dreading something, and I think for me that's what I start noticing. I start getting like a knot in my stomach, and a lot of times it is dreading a potential emotional reaction from someone, but it's that dread. It's that like just something's just like waiting to just fall on you, kind of feeling. And that just like that waiting for the other shoe to drop, kind of just, oh God, I know it's coming. And that to me is the one where I'll notice it. And sometimes I'll misattribute it. So that I think is where I get into the most trouble, is when I think it's because I'm worried about this over here or that. And actually, no, that's just nice little squirrel distracting you out there. It's not really what it is. Stop looking at the bright shiny. It's actually something else. But yeah, for me, it's that sense of dread, and that just like pit in your stomach where you just hit me with it already. Just make it stop.
And I think it begs for you to expound on, how do you challenge yourself to not try to mislabel it?
Well, I think because at the end of the day, once I land on what the issue really is, I know it. And I think, the few times in the past couple of years when I can look back and realize that no, I was chasing a different bright, shiny object. It didn't take long before I realized, yeah, that really wasn't it. And then I have to go, and it's that I think it's more frustrating than anything else, because then it's like, well, wasted my time chasing something else down, man. Though in reality, if it's worth chasing, it's probably worth chasing regardless of whether or not it was number one priority or not. But yeah, no, I think that's really what it comes down to, is that like when I land on it, like usually it's pretty hard to miss. And as long as I know once you know that's what something feels like, it becomes harder and harder over time to blow past that moment and be like, oh, I didn't have that, like, that real like shoe drop moment. Like, but you're like, yeah, if you didn't have it, then you're not done. Go back. You're not there yet. And so I think that to me is where I've kind of figured out that like, if I don't get like this huge sense of like, oh God, that's what it was, like this like enormous like relief, then yeah, that wasn't it.
Oh, at paying homage to the gremlin exercise in
Yeah.
iPad coaching. I mean, that floored me. And
Oh no, the gremlin was a good one.
that was a good exercise.
Yep.
And you spoke to something there too, particularly around not only creating awareness about what the thing is, but understanding when it's like growing into a monster. That was something that I needed to challenge. And again, we catastrophize really, really well.
Oh no, yeah.
And so even challenging again what's true versus what we're making true about a situation that we're trying to process and navigate. That's been another good one for me. Just learning what all that means. And so I've been putting every coaching certificate and class that I've ever attended into practice over the past several weeks to just manage what's going on as I navigate this season.
Yeah, well, and that's, I think to me, that's where, it's funny. So I had a speaking engagement with a women's group, and one of my favorite questions is always, kind of what would you recommend like for other women? And like, my first kind of point is always that, actually, I think even if you don't have any desire to be a coach, I think going through coaching training is extremely valuable. But having said that, I also realize that's a big commitment. It's, not a trivial exercise. So one of the things that I have found that's actually really good and helps in a very similar way is actually improv classes. Because one of the biggest things that we focus on in coaching is getting a handle on your inner voice, right? And your inner critic, and getting your inner critic to shut the hell up and sit down and just leave the decision making to someone else. And that's a huge part of improv. But what I actually find about it is that, when you're kind of going through that process with other people, improv is an interesting way for it to be kind of non-threatening, right? Like when you're in coaching training, like shit can get heavy and you get into your own stuff, and you're, working with partners who are also like having their own like, oh my God moments. And that's all great if that's what you're ready for. If you're not quite there yet, or you want to take kind of a baby steps into that particular waiting pool, what I like about improv is that, it's intended to be a lighter environment, but it still starts getting you listening for the voice in your head that's judging you and that's stopping you and that's telling you you can't do this, or telling you that, oh, that's not a good idea, or that's not smart enough, or like anything like that. And as you start to become more aware of that voice as being different than you, it's that part is, I think, a big part of, the gremlin work is it's not you, it's the part, it's your inner critical, like, pissy, judgmental, that's not you, it's something different. And I think that for me, watching that improv experience with different people has been really an entertaining sort of lightweight version of that, which I often end up coming back and recommending, because I honestly hadn't, I mean, it makes sense. You can't do improv if your inner critic is like, just shouting you down. But it's not as like emotionally exhausting necessarily as taking on like coaching training. So it's just funny because I think that's one of those things that comes up.
Yeah. No, it's definitely an exercise dealing with conflict. I think it's definitely the exercise in riffing with your inner self. And I love the improv example because I love whose line is it anyway?
Oh God, yeah, one of the best ever. Right? Exactly. And I think especially when you kind of get to the point where you can distinguish between your inner critic and what's actually happening in the moment, or what the rest of you. I think then being an anticipation junkie about someone else's reaction to something, like all of that stuff can kind of be managed just a little bit more easily. And then you can just deal with what's there and what's actually happening. Because I think, again, for me, anticipating someone having an emotional reaction, there's not much helpful about it. Like if you think they're going to give you like legitimate pushback on absolute, like, tangible points that you need to be prepared to address, then okay, that's one thing. But just like the angst of, oh my God, they're going to get worked up, and oh my God, it's going to be messy, and oh, I don't want to do this. Like there's nothing productive for you in that. right? Like you have to be able to move past that. And so if part of it is, all right, look, that my inner critic or my inner judge who's going to be like, oh no, you're going to upset her and she's going to be mad at you for 6 months and then she's going to make every team meeting is going to be impossible because like, you know, like that's not a helpful voice to listen to at all, ever, because it doesn't get you anywhere. You don't get anything done.
I love it. I love it. So yeah. So if you think about just one takeaway that somebody be like, all right, navigating conflict, what's your one takeaway for somebody?
To be honest, I actually like that you brought it back to the gremlin, because I actually think that so much of our own approach to dealing with conflict is about us fighting our own battles and our own demons. Really has frequently. So yeah, obviously, you know, if you know that your brother or your spouse or whatever always has, you know, a knee-jerk reaction, like that's okay, that's fine. You can understand that. But at the end of the day, like just generally, if you're avoiding conflict around you, that's about you. And that's about what you're carrying around in your head. And so really that gets back to, you know, understanding your own, just where your judgment of yourself is. And if it's, you know, am I worried that I'm not going to handle it well? Am I worried that somebody's not going to like me when it's done? Like, what is it in my head that's making me dodge or duck or procrastinate or, you know, whatever it is that I'm doing to avoid conflict? Because it's not, you know, I think very rarely is it really about other people. More often than not, it's us dealing with our own stuff.
Definitely. And I think, yeah, mine as well is kind of that getting to what's true and what's not. And that way I can deal with the facts. You can deal with the facts of a situation. Because again, where I am good, like you already alluded to, good at placing things in other buckets. Like, yeah, that's why. Yeah, right. And so just being able to check in on yourself and challenge those things have been really, really a great tool in my toolbox. So yeah, so great conversation today.
Well, I'm glad that your week is ending better than it started.
Sure is.
So, all righty. Well, in that case, I think we are a wrap for today. So thank you very much, my friend. As always, it is lovely to speak with you.
Always a pleasure, Laura. And until next time, folks, we will see you later.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a great week.